Hello, everyone, and welcome to Building a Collections Process. My name is Lynette, and I am the newest member of the education team here at ConnectWise. Prior to coming to ConnectWise, I did spend 5 years working in partners in various roles. Most importantly, I've done the finance clerk and some of the finance operations and the procurement specialist. So I'm bringing all of that experience and knowledge to my role here and hoping to add some value for you folks.
Hi, and I'm Renee Bergstresser. I'm also a software training consultant. I've been with the ConnectWise team for about 7 years now. Most of that time I've been in education, but I started off in support. I work primarily with Manage and Sell. We're both super excited today to get into onboarding, and we broke this topic down into a few different bits so that we could work through it together. And the first part is really just how do we present our invoices to customers? Because typically our collections issues come up from invoices not being paid on time. So what can we do on our end to make that an easier situation and limit the need for collections in the first place? We'll then get into one of our favorite pro tips, which is really to have a separate board for your finance and collections processes. Whether you call it finance, collections, finance/collections, whatever works for you, this board is going to be really helpful to give you the same accountability that maybe you have on your service desk, but for billing questions and collections processes. We'll also get into some pro tips for how we can monitor invoices. So how do we prevent our team from having to manually look through all of our invoices, see what's overdue, create a record and follow up on it? How can we use some of the tools within Manage to make that process a lot easier and less time consuming? And then lastly, we're going to talk a bit about the collections solution set, which if you're going through this webinar and maybe you're a bit overwhelmed, you're thinking, oh, I need to build out a new service board, I need to create some workflow rules. Maybe I even need to build out a track. I don't know how to do that. I've never done it before. Don't worry, because a solution set is essentially all the records we talk about that you can just download into your system and start using, or import into your system and start using right away. So keep that in mind as we're going through. The collection solution set will be your one-stop shop for getting all the information we chat about. So first things first, our presenting invoices to customers section, which really I like to think of as preventing the collections process. What can we do to keep customers out of this process? And I wanted to start this section off with a quick kind of discussion prompt for you all. Why do your customers end up in collections? What happens that causes this process to be needed in the first place? What we tend to hear, it could be all over the place. I'm curious to see if you all agree or disagree, but what we tend to hear is that it's either the customer is experiencing financial troubles, maybe they've changed their process for approving and paying invoices and it's caused some delays on their end or some mishaps, some human error. There could also be a situation where they're refusing to pay work because they don't think that it was priced fairly or they didn't like the service that was delivered. It could also be that they're just confused by what's on the invoice, so they're delaying payment until they understand what it is they're paying for. Yeah, and what we're seeing is oftentimes bills are just not being paid on time. For whatever reason, maybe there's a credit card that went poorly, or there was an auto payment issue in their payment provider. There are tons of reasons why this could happen. But really what we want to focus on, at least for this section, is what's within our control. What issues could we help alleviate for the customer? So when customers experience barriers, whether it's trying to access, understand, or pay these invoices, they can end up in collections unintentionally. It could be like we were talking about in the chat where they didn't pay their bill because there was actually an issue with the payment or a credit card expired. But for all the situations that we can control, what can we do to help contacts pay faster? Some things that we can work on from within Manage to prevent customers from ending up in collections is to make it simple, to make it easy for them to both locate and review those invoices, easy for them to understand it, and easy as possible for them to remit payment. Now, what this does is if we make it really easy for them to access payment, it prevents the issue of having lost invoices. We'll get into the customer portal and some other great ways that we can make that easier. Some other things that we want to do are improve the accuracy of our invoices. In what ways can we make sure that whether it's user count, device count, maybe we bill by usage, that is consistent every month and correct, so we don't have questions or complaints about our invoices coming through. And then lastly, what can we do to display value on each and every invoice? We really don't want to end up in a situation where maybe there's a new billing contact at this company and they see an invoice that looks very generic and it's for a decent bit of money and it comes through every month, and maybe they put it in the pile for review because they're thinking, hey, this might be an area where we as a company can cut costs. Well, if we don't have a lot of detail on our invoice and we're not selling our services each and every month, we can end up in that pile. What we want to do is describe the services that we're offering on each and every invoice so anyone can understand our value and they know, okay, this is something I need to continue with. I should pay this right away. So for the first bit, to make it really easy to access, understand, and pay, I love to recommend the new customer portal. It should be, for your clients, the new one-stop shop for submitting tickets, maybe reviewing project progress, and reviewing invoices. Within that second menu option on the far left, they have the ability to see all their invoices. Now, this can be everything that's past due. They can also filter it to show what they've paid in the past. So it's a really nice log of all the invoices that you've sent them and really where they're at, what they need to pay and what they have paid in the past. So in this sense, we've eliminated the issue of someone saying, hey, your email got buried in a ton of emails that I received last month. I just didn't catch it, or maybe I accidentally deleted it. That happens, but we want to make sure that there's a place where they can find it at any point, no matter what's going on with their emails. Also, maybe that billing contact left the company or is on an extended leave. Maybe they're helping out a family member and they won't be checking in for a couple weeks. Well, through the customer portal, we don't just have to be sending that invoice to specific individuals. We can give the company owner, the billing contact, the finance manager, any appropriate members of that organization access to review and pay invoices. So that's another issue that can come up that can be eliminated by having this really nice spot where we can send anyone to pay invoices. Now within, they not only can pay these invoices, but they can review the invoice details. We have a really nice template, I think, for displaying these details on the portal. It's a little bit cleaner than what you might be used to in the PDF, so I really appreciate that. And then, of course, if you have payment integration set up, any of these three, they can actually remit payment right from here. So it's a really easy place for them to complete this. Now, speaking of emails, we likely still want to email them and let them know they have an invoice. And hopefully you're already using invoice batch emailing, and this is a pretty simple process for you to select and send these out every month or as needed. Well, within this email text, there's a couple things we can do to encourage our partners to get into the customer portal and simplify their process there. Of course, we can include the link directly to our customer portal by using that customer portal URL token. And we can also choose whether or not we want to attach that standard PDF invoice to this email. Attaching it might be able to give them another option for remitting payment, possibly just an email or an address where they can send a check, mail a check, but also we could remove it and kind of insist that they go to the portal where it's easier for us to manage their invoices and for them to submit payment right away. So it's entirely up to you, but just so you know, that option is there. We also want to improve the accuracy of our invoices. It's one thing if we've made them really easy to access and super easy to pay. If it's not the right amount, we're going to run into issues with customers paying, and of course delays in paying if they're really checking their invoices and unsure if they're paying the right amount. So the first thing there is really more of a service best practice, which is all time, all the time, on the time. All time, all the time, on time. That's our best practice. So really we want to make sure those time entries are entered regularly so that they're more accurate. And we want our entire team to have a process where they're being reviewed, and we essentially know that maybe on Friday everything's submitted, Monday it's reviewed, Tuesday's corrections, Wednesday we can send out an invoice. If we have that really nice process going, we know that our invoices are going to be more accurate overall. But the second bit, the one that's maybe even more in our control from the finance perspective, which is kind of what this webinar is targeting, is think about your monthly agreements. How could you make those more accurate? A place where we tend to see issues or where we hear complaints is often when you're purchasing items from vendors, whether it's licenses that maybe change throughout the month or usage that can fluctuate every month. It's a lot of manual work to take those spreadsheets sent from vendors and compare it to each and every agreement, possibly each and every edition, to make sure it's updated and accurate. Well, in this case, fortunately, we have not a new, but newer enhancement called billing reconciliation, where you can actually import entire spreadsheets sent to you from your vendors, map them to agreement additions, and really quickly and easily get a high-level view of what's being changed and either accept or reject the change. You can also, if you're working with the marketplace, if you're purchasing from vendors there are a whole list of ones. Also, our product Fortify, it's a whole list of different products where you can just import that data and update the additions without worrying about that human error element or possibly saving yourself a ton of time. So for whichever reason, this is a great way to make that easier. A couple small things also, we have the ability to mass update additions, something like a managed user. Likely you're not getting that from a vendor, it's something that you've created. You can still update them in mass to change the price maybe for all of your agreements from that agreements additions tab. So there are awesome mass actions for additions and even some integrations that'll keep these updated for you automatically. I know Automate and Unite have that capability. Another side of improving the accuracy of your invoices and also displaying value is by leveraging those additions to not only make the ability to track and update cost and price so much easier, also quantity, but also the ability to include the right details for your customer. So on each addition, you have the ability to enter in the addition details, which will display on the invoice. Now we could keep this really short and sweet. For certain customers that might be totally appropriate and all they need to see. But for someone that might not know really anything about backup and disaster recovery or why it's so important to have a partner working with you in your Office 365 setup, that's where it'd be really nice to add in some more marketing style details. This way, if there's a new billing contact, maybe they're not super technical, they don't just see that you help them with Office 365, they see that having you as a partner with Office 365 means that you have limited downtime and it helps you stay connected with your customers more frequently. So this is just one way that we can help encourage our customers to see the value in our work and hopefully submit payments more quickly. The last option I wanted to bring up is invoice grouping. This is actually something that Lynette and I talked about when we were prepping for this webinar, which is I'm talking about granularity, how nice it is to have all these details, all these line items. Well, you might get pushback from an owner saying, whoa, we don't want to have all those details available because people might argue certain items off the contract, or it could cause other questions or concerns. If that's the case, we do have another option for you, which I would always say include the granular details that your team needs. And if you must, like for example, in this network drop example, you can actually go into the agreement additions tab or any record additions tab and select the products and add them to an invoice group. By adding them to an invoice group, I'm not changing anything about these products except what displays on the invoice. So once I've done that, those two products are still being billed at the same amount, but instead of showing the individual items required for the network drop, this is actually just summarizing and explaining what a network drop is and what the final price is.
Excellent, thank you, Renee. So now let's talk about the Finance Service Board. I have a question for everyone. How do you currently handle your billing questions that are coming in from your clients? Are you so by email, I'm hoping maybe a shared email inbox. Do you get a lot by phone calls? Email definitely looks like it's the big one here. Well, that's great because email is really easy to turn into an email connector that can go right to a service board. So if we're getting phone calls and even those emails that come into our inbox, sometimes we lose track of them and we forget to follow up on those questions. And the week gets away from us and those questions are buried at the bottom of our inbox. So we need some place that we can track our customer billing issues, but still have accountability around making sure that those get answered. So by creating a finance service board for billing and collections, we can restrict that board to just the members who need to be seen as. So no more of the service desk having privy to conversations that, might not be really not in their wheelhouse, not something that they need to be up to date on. We can also create this finance specific tasks or statuses, I apologize. Those finance specific statuses. So there are things that we're going to have on the finance board, like delinquent payment. They're not going to have that on the service board. That's not a status that's going to translate. And even if you're reviewing to shut off their services, So these are specific to your finance process and how that works for you in your business. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how you build accountability around those billing tasks and those customer replies and make sure that nothing is slipping through the cracks like it might be today. So first, let's talk about setting up the member access so that we make sure that only the people in finance and who should be looking at those conversations are having those conversations. So when you set up your finance board, or if you already have one, you can go under the service board setup table and look at the member access tab. This, you can see, shows you who has access and who doesn't. And from here, if we're building it the first time, we can select who we want to have access, and we can either add or remove access right from here. Then, if we've already had this set up and in place for a little while, and maybe we're wondering, wait, who still has access? Do they need access? We can filter the board by who has access and who doesn't have access, and then take those actions appropriately from there as well to make sure that the right people are able to see this and that the people who don't need to be aren't distracted by this board. Next, when you're setting up a new member, this is a great time to, if you know somebody's coming in, you just hired somebody new on your service desk, restrict the board access directly in here from the finance board. And so it'll show up right on that, it'll show up as no access on that service board setup tab. The other option is if you have more than just the finance board, maybe you have an internal HR board that you don't want support desk privy to, or maybe there's an admin board that you guys kind of talk about sales and potential clients. By restricting the support desk to just their department, they won't have access to any of these boards that are outside of the support department. And then you don't have to worry about restricting 5 or 6 boards or whatever that might look like. Now, the opposite of that is for those people in your finance department, you want to make sure that they are set up correctly, that this finance and collections board is their default board, so they're not getting distracted and confused by those service tickets. You want them to be able to go right to the finance board, answer those questions, and do what they need to do on a daily basis. So by setting the department as finance and setting their default board, we enable them to do their job successfully. Next, we talked about finance-specific statuses. So you can see here we have client responded, which is, something you probably have on your service board as well, but things like owner email sent, credit hold, delinquent, and client has been shut off. These are going to be specific to your finance process and what those steps are that you want to take as a business when that customer is late with their payment. And also depends on how much time you want to give them. Now you can see here we have two different new statuses, and I want to point this out because with these, it's specific to the status notification steps. So we have one for if those emails come in through that email connector, like we talked about. Everybody who has an email currently set up, really easy, set it up to go to this service board. This email connector, you can then have it set up to send them back a notification saying, hey, we've got your ticket, we've gotten your inquiry, we'll respond in whatever your standard response is, 2 days, however that looks for you. This other one, the just new status, that is for tickets that are going to come in from workflow rules. So this is something that we're going to have a slightly different status notification for this. In this case, we're going to send maybe the client and the account manager an email that says, hey, we want to bring to your attention that your balance is outstanding. By doing this and having the status notification, this standardizes this email. And no longer you have to worry about, well, Sue sent it last time and Jim's sending it this time, and they're sending different information and they're giving different time to pay, and no more of that. This is all standard. We give them the invoice number, the invoice date. All of this information is then in the ticket. When they respond back, you have all of the information you need to be able to look into this question and look into this issue and get the payment applied appropriately.
And now, fortunately, now that we have a board set up, we have a place where when we're monitoring invoices, we can actually build some accountability. So I love what Lynette brings up about having the different new statuses, because it's so important to consider why someone might end up on that board. They might have a question about their invoice, and when you send out emails through invoice batch emailing, hopefully that board's email address is the reply. So when they respond to it saying, hey, this invoice doesn't look right, it shows up on that board. You would interact with that a little bit differently than you would for something in this example, which I'm going to show in a second, where they're actually already late on their payments. You've created a ticket to track that. So some of the things that we want to do is make sure that we can really quickly and easily trigger the collections process without too much manual work from our team. We've already done the difficult thing. We've built out the board and we've made sure the statuses match our processes. Now it's just time to set the appropriate triggers in place using workflow rules. One thing we want to make sure happens is we want a ticket generated whenever an invoice is 30 days past due. In this sense, a workflow rule is constantly checking our environment. Whenever that 30 days comes up, it generates that ticket, which will be a great place for anyone on our team who has and should have access to that board to start working through this issue and get that customer up to speed. We also want to make sure we notify the right people. Oftentimes, you might have an individual at your organization who should receive these updates. Maybe it's your current finance manager, but I would maybe consider choosing a role like the account manager assigned to each company, or maybe using a department role at your organization, just to make sure that if that person leaves that role, this process is still continuing and is still going to continue working for your company. Now, at a certain point, we might need to change the company status. This is a really important piece of collections where not only is it just our billing board and our finance team working through this, but we actually can loop in our service team automatically. Things like a credit hold company status can actually prevent someone from even entering time on a ticket. It can have a pop-up notification saying that they're on credit hold, and that way, hopefully you're having weekly meetings and people are in the know. But if they're not and they just happen to get one of these tickets, it can be a great way to make sure that you're interacting with that customer appropriately. Before I get into the actual workflow rules and how they're built, I did want to explain briefly how Manage even knows that something is considered overdue, or how your customer should know that something is considered overdue. And for that, we're going to look at 3 specific fields on the invoice record. Now, if you're actually wondering why this record looks clean, it's because it's what I explained before. It is our portal invoice. This is what it would look like on the customer portal. You can actually see it at any time within Manage if you click View Portal Invoice instead of the Print Invoice button that you might typically use to see that PDF. But I'm focusing up on the upper right-hand corner of this invoice where I have the date, the due date, and the terms listed. So when you create these invoices, I like to think of it as you're essentially stamping all the invoices you're creating right now with the invoice date that you've selected. This means if it's getting late in the month and I want to create invoices in advance, maybe I'm going to be on vacation on the 1st and I don't want to send them out that day. I want to send them out a little bit early. I can still have the invoice date listed as the 1st, even though today's date isn't the 1st. So in that case, I stamp it with the invoice date and it shows up right here. Then what Manage does is it pulls the terms, which in some places in Manage is called billing terms. Typically, we'll see due upon receipt, net 30 days, net 60 days. It could be set from the company finance screen. It could be from a specific agreement that's overriding what's on the finance screen, giving them a different time frame. But it really just depends on where this invoice is being generated from and what's set there. But essentially, Manage will take the date that was stamped on it when it was created, the terms associated with that record, and then calculate the due date of the invoice, which in this case, it's pretty simple. Net 30 days means it's due on the 1st of July. So in this example, we have invoice date plus billing terms equals due date. And that's the date that we're focusing on for the workflow rule we're going to create. Because essentially, we want to push them into collections once they're 30 days past the 1st. So that's the workflow rule that we're going to be running. We want them to be 30 days overdue. Now, you may be thinking even now, well, wouldn't I want to be targeting them a little bit sooner? Wouldn't I want to be reaching out before it was overdue? And absolutely, you can build out this process to include as many workflow events and triggers as you need to build out your full collections process and Manage. We just have a more specific example. So consider it doesn't necessarily have to be it's this many days late or invoices this many days past the due date. It could be the number of days before the invoice is due. It could be it was created no more than this many days ago. So we have a lot of options when building this out. But in this specific example, we're focusing on 30 days overdue. That's when we want a ticket to hit our finance/collections board, because this is where we're going to start reaching out to them and really trying to get this payment, or we're going to need to move them into a credit hold status. So what this workflow rule does, and if you're not familiar with workflow rules, it's essentially you design an event. That's what the rule is searching for in your system. So the rule is looking for any invoices that are 30 days past their due date, they have not been paid in full, and they're listed as closed. So we know that they've been emailed. That's what the workflow rule is looking for. Now, when the workflow rule finds a record that matches all three of those criteria, it's actually going to do two things. The first action is to create an activity. It's actually a closed activity, so it's more of a historical record that's going to be assigned to the account manager, but it's just going to show that they are 30 days late on one of their invoices. It'll list out in their company record activities. It will also create a service ticket. Now, this service ticket is what's going to show up on our service finance board, and we'll start tracking it to determine when we should move them into credit hold status. Now, you'll notice that when you click create service ticket, you do have to list what ticket template you want it to use. We actually created one that's just called collections past due invoice, and that's the one that I would recommend using for this. It's really just going to have a single task saying, hey, review this customer account, make sure they're supposed to be in this process, and then we're going to start moving forward with collections. Now, for both of these items, for this workflow rule and the ticket template, like I mentioned before, a lot of this is already in the solution set, so Lynette will go over that in detail, but these records do exist for you if you're interested in simply importing them and starting to use them. But I did want to also call out that if these events or the actions don't fit what you want in your collection process, we have really excellent documentation on event triggers and action types for workflow rules. So I would definitely check that out. Oftentimes it's easier for me just because so many of our partners have different processes, different policies around collections. I think it's easier to map something out. How many days before would you want, like write it down physically? How many days before would you want someone to be notified? Who should be notified? Do you want the account manager involved before the email goes out to the customer? And then once you know that, I think it'll make a lot more sense which items in this you need to tweak and maybe what you'd want to add to this. One that I like that I've thought of before is adding in an email to the contact 2 days before it's considered 30 days overdue. And that way, or 30 days before it's overdue. And that way they can maybe get a jump on it and reach out before they get this ticket created and pushed into this process. The other bit I want to talk about is once that ticket is created, or for those tickets that are simply just replies to email invoices you've sent out, how are we going to handle those tickets? Well, in some ways, it's going to look exactly like our service board. So you might want to use some workflow rules that you currently keep on your service board to keep your resources on those tickets and have the status updating appropriately. In this case, you'll see down here at the very bottom, and this looks like any other service board workflow rule, where it's a ticket's been responded to, we need to move it to client responded. So that's going to help keep our service board, keep the visibility up on responses from customers. But we also have two different rules that are two different events. One's looking at tickets that are new and haven't been updated in 7 days. That sounds like a mistake. We probably want the right people involved to start working on that. Also, maybe the ticket was moved into delinquent. That's the next step in our collections process and it's been sitting for a while. Well, let's make sure that an email is sent and the ticket status has been sent as well. And kind of like I mentioned with the previous, you can make these as automated as you'd like or not. You could change the company status based on workflow rules. You can change you can send out emails to the customer, create activities to the account manager. There's really so much potential, but we did want to keep the example a little more on the simple side, just if you don't have anything yet in Manage built out for this. And then lastly, I wanted to bring up the idea of company status because I do think this is so important for keeping your team members in the loop. Once someone is significantly overdue, we're likely going to want to move them into a credit hold status, which could prevent our team from saving their tickets. It's going to warn them that they should not receive service. That's going to help out our service team. We also have the ability of including a custom note, which means that not only will it give it this generic credit hold message, but maybe I could also on that company's company finance page add additional details. Maybe if the customer reaches out saying we're trying to work out payment, they know who to reach out to or where to forward that email. And then something that's also really handy is if someone's moving through collections, maybe you're using tracks right now, hopefully you are, for drip marketing campaigns or maybe just for prospects. Well, if you're marketing to your existing customers for new services, you likely do not want to continue marketing to someone who is now on credit hold. What's nice about this is that within a company status, you can automate this to where it cancels all open tracks. So all those marketing emails are going to stop immediately. It can also attach a new track. In this case, it's a collections one. What's exciting about this is that the collections track we've actually designed, and it's available, surprise, in the solution set that Lynette will be going over. But this track is really going to reach out to the customer. So once you've determined this person should be placed in credit hold, it'll apply this track automatically. If your status is set up like I have it set up here, it'll send an email to them saying how many days it's overdue. And this track has actually been set up to where the account manager is reached out to with an activity or assigned to an activity the day before the customer gets an email. So there's always a chance for your team to intervene, maybe give them a phone call, check in with them personally, and remove this track or change the status back to active before it emails the customer saying, hey, now it's 60 days, now it's 90 days, now you're being put on hold. But of course, if this track is allowed to run through all the way, we can't get in touch with them. It's actually going to automatically move them into a former client company status. It's another place where you can edit it to meet your needs. I would get in here and change the email text to represent your brand and your voice, but it does have some generic information in there that you might be able to use.
Thanks, Renee. So let's talk about those collection solution sets. So this is a great jumping off place. Who here has ever used the marketplace, either for finding other partner companies or for importing service boards or workflow rules? Great, always great to see that some people are using the marketplace. Awesome. So happy to see that we do have people out here using the marketplace. So let's look at, for those who haven't or might not know what it is, let's take a look at what that looks like and how you get there. So like Renee said, the collection solution set is pre-configured stuff that you could just import into Manage and start using right away. You don't have to think about it, and you can customize it to whatever your process looks like. This is the 5 items that we have out here in the collection solution set. We have a service board, a couple workflow rules, that ticket template that Renee mentioned, as well as that track. And I love tracks. Tracks for finance are the best. I know workflow rules are great. Workflow rules are reactive. Tracks are a little more proactive. They follow a certain date, they go on their train, and they're going to hit these certain stops at the certain dates. And for sending out emails for collections, this is the perfect opportunity. You don't have to think about it. It standardizes the emails. It standardizes the timeline that you're sending this stuff on. And because of the fact it can be set from the company status, you can easily start and stop them appropriately depending on what the needs are. So when you're importing from the marketplace, something to keep in mind is you need to be in the desktop application. I don't import from the marketplace a lot, so I was looking at some stuff the other day trying to import some stuff in for testing, and I'm like, why is this not working? Because I wasn't in the desktop app. So it happens to all of us. The other thing is you need to make sure that you have administrative rights to do this. So if you don't have the system module or you haven't been given access to the marketplace, you need to talk to whoever your ConnectWise administrator is, talk with them about either importing them or giving you access to be able to do that. So the marketplace is found under the system module. And then once you get there, there's definitely a lot of other cool things to check out, but what we're focused on today is going to be that partner exchange. So this is a great opportunity. ConnectWise uploads things as well as other partners. So there might be other partners out there who have updated things that can help you out too. Right now, we're going to look at the solution sets, and we're going to search by the collections one. So the collection solution set, we're just going to click view to see what all is in it. And that's going to take us and show us our items that are here. From here, we need to hit import. And this is why you need to be in the desktop app. And then once you import it, it's going to give you a list of some questions and some information that you have to put in to customize it to your location and your situation. You can see we have, on this case, we have 4 items that are star. Those are going to be required before you can click that OK button to bring this into your instance of Manage. The other things are optional, and you can definitely play with them as you get into it. None of this stuff is set in stone. You can definitely go back if you decide you want to change the email address and use it more of a group email, you can definitely go back and change that. But once you start using the board, some things, specifically location and department, cannot be changed if you start using it. So bring it in, play with it, change the settings, tweak them, make sure they're just right, but make sure that you have that what you want in the location and the department set before you start using this board. It's a lot harder to make changes after that. And you can see there's our track down there at the bottom. Again, just tracks are great for collections. I can't say enough. I really like them for collections and for sales, and they just follow that process and give you that regular routine of what needs to be done. So then the other thing we have out on the university is our collections partner kit. So this video, once it's published, will be out there as part of this as well. But you can see we have a couple of how-to videos on some of the things that Renee talked about earlier about setting up your customer portal, marking some of those workflow rules, and how to even go back and mark an invoice as paid to make sure that they don't end up in collections inadvertently. Also, we have our collections checklist out here. So this is a great opportunity for you to see which of these things that you want to implement in your instance. And the collections process blueprint is a great diagram of, okay, this is our workflow rule, and you can see how does this work, how does this correlate to what you're doing in your company, and what would you maybe change and take from ours, or what do you like that's working in yours?
Absolutely. Thank you, Lynette. And that webinar will be up on the university within just a couple days, and then of course, yeah, added to this partner kit. So that can be a great place to look to find all this information. I did want to go ahead and say we're getting to our wrap up. If you have any questions about either some of the processes or tools that we've mentioned, or just collections in general, please feel free to add those to the chat pod. We don't have too many questions yet, but we do have some additional information to share. Just start thinking of those answers and type them in, and we'll be happy to go through them for you. But our key takeaways from this session: set up the customer portal. Take the time to build that out to meet your needs. If you can, have that payment integration set up there so that it's really easy for your customers to see their invoices, all of them at one time, and pay them. Also create a finance service board. That finance service board is going to help out a ton with organizing that billing process. Not only is it that our service team you may not want your service team to have access to these billing questions and billing concerns that customers send in, it's also very distracting. We don't want that on the same board where we are trying to dispatch and work through our tickets really quickly. The last thing we want is maybe a server down, or a payment, or not a payment issue, but a server down or a machine issue to get buried beneath a bunch of automatic email replies when someone is receiving invoices. By having a separate finance board, it's easier for us to filter through those, handle the responses by the right members with a different SLA, the appropriate SLA. Additionally, think about ways that you can use not only workflow rules, but also tracks, status changes. They can create activities. Both of these records, workflow rules and tracks, can do a lot for your business. And it really just depends on whether you want something to be scanning your environment, finding records, and completing actions, or if you want more of a set it and forget it process of communication like a track. So consider what your needs are for collections and use the best resource that will fit that. So now, do we have any questions? I've only seen one come through, and it's about using the aging details and aging summary reports. Now, I'm not sure of a way to include most of our standard reports you can't customize. So it wouldn't be something where I could add a standard note. I could always send out the detail reports, the aging detail reports to my customer individually. That can be really helpful because it can show them what amount is 30 days overdue, 60 days overdue, or 90 days overdue. So it's a really useful report, but I don't know of any ways to customize it or ensure that it sends out with a special message. That might just be something that I would recommend doing as one of the activities, maybe on the track, or maybe as a task on the ticket that's created, send out this report to the customer. I think that would be a way to add that into your process. And then just as we're waiting to see if any other questions come in, I did want to talk about a new resource that is coming to the university very soon. Okay, thank you, Stephanie. It looks like that's what you're doing now, which is it's one of your tasks and you're just sending that out individually. Yeah, I would do what you can to automate the notification to send it out, either build it into a track as an activity that simply says, print the AR aging report for this customer and send to them today. That way it's still something you can track and something that your team member is accountable for doing and remembers to do. Or I would have that as a task on that service ticket, which when you import that ticket template, you can add on additional tasks, as many as you need. You can have attachments with process sheets, whatever would help your team handle these collections tickets. Thank you, Stephanie. but something that's coming to the university very soon. It's actually our third path in our path to product proficiency. Our team is currently working very hard to finish up our finance and operations path. Now, if you're not already familiar, we have two that are currently available on the university that you can peruse. They essentially, what we tried to do is think about all of the features that we have, all of the products that we have, and what an individual role actually needs to know to be competent and comfortable working within that product. So in our service delivery, we have what a technician might need, what a service manager might need, and it goes into automate in some places. There's a lot of manage information, but we do talk about automate and also control, what those team members need to know. It also is driven by business cases. So in the sales and marketing one, it's not necessarily just what a quote template is, but how you would use it and why you would use it to become more efficient in your role. So our finance and operations one is coming soon, and it will touch on a lot of the topics that we've covered here. Hopefully by the time you review this, maybe if you're looking at this webinar in the video library, it's already available for you. So definitely check that out.
Renee, I was so happy to see that quite a few people who are joining us today have used the marketplace, and that we're not just up here putting the stuff up here and talking about it for ourselves. It's great to see that people are out there using it.
Oh, absolutely. And now you would access the marketplace. Like Lynette was saying, it's best to access it from within the desktop client of Manage, because that's the only place where you can actually import it directly into your system. But if you're ever just curious and you want to see what's going on there, you can access the marketplace actually directly from the university. So if I'm on the university right now, I would go into community. I would go into community and select marketplace, and just go into that partner exchange like Lynette was mentioning. And now this solution set we have these solution sets, there's a bunch of them in there, but if you're looking for something very specific, like maybe you're looking for HTML email templates or possibly agreement types, there's so much information in here. Anything with that CW colon means that it was generated and created and uploaded by our team, but we also have tons of partners that have been very generous with the work that they've done, whether it's a mobile-friendly email template, and they've uploaded them here to share with others. So I would definitely give this a look. And also within our university, of course, this webinar is going to live in our video library here. But if you're looking for that path to product proficiency and maybe you didn't grab that URL, it is right here. And I guess since we have a little bit of time, I'm just going to show you really quickly what it's all about. But I don't see any more questions coming in, so I'll go ahead and wrap up after this. Let's see. Here we go. So if you come to this page, hopefully by the time you look at this, we'll have finance and operations ready. But something like service delivery, it's broken down by the individual's role. So I can select whether I'm a dispatcher, automate admin, service team member, and it's really just going to show me the things that I need to know. So some tips for dispatching, painting the calendar green, how to triage a ticket, the process that we recommend. So hopefully this is really beneficial for your team. I like to recommend it for anyone who's just come through implementation, or maybe you're starting a new role at the organization or just want to refresh it. It can be a great resource for really anyone, I think. So with that, quick reminder, customer portal, I cannot recommend this enough. We do have a webinar completely dedicated to the customer portal. It's keeping connected with your customers through the customer portal, I believe. And that goes through the whole setup. So if you want someone to walk you through it, that's a great place to go. Go ahead and import that service board and just help your team have some delineation between your service and your finance work, and then workflow rules and tracks, just wherever you can to make life easier for your team and have more consistent messaging for your customers. With that, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.